Welcome back to this latest episode of Japan's Top Business Interviews. I'm your host, Dr. Greg Story, President of Carnegie Tokyo Training Japan, and my special guest today is David Bennett, who is actually moving to the States, having been the president of Lenovo here in Japan. David, welcome.
Welcome. Thanks for having me, Greg. Appreciate it.
Please give us your backstory.
Oh, it's a long story. You know, I started my career in Japan about 15 years ago. I did about a year after the JET program, like many, people we know here in Japan do. I did a year of recruitment consulting, and one of my specialty was in semiconductors. Personally, I love computers. While I did my major in something very different, I did my minor in computer sciences. And I joined a company called AMD here in Japan. And I was fortunate to move around the world with AMD and kind of work my way up there. And then when I was leaving AMD, they gave me an opportunity Lenovo reached out and gave me an opportunity to come back and run, one of their big businesses here in Japan. So I jumped at the chance to come back.
How many years have you been here now?
Great question. If I add it all up, it's been about 12 or 13 years. In total. If I look at my career through Japan, it's been kind of back and forth. I did a year in high school, a year in university, a year in grad school, a year in post-grad, and then I came back on the JET program. I didn't do the English teaching part. There's another international coordinator type thing. I did that for 2 years, and then following that, I was with AMD here in Tokyo for about 3 or 4 years.
Why that 1 year in Japan?
Oh, it was just, if people don't know my background, it's a bit interesting. My family's Jamaican. And when you're a white Jamaican family, you have family all over the world. They usually emigrated from Jamaica in the early 80s, late 70s. So I wanted to go somewhere in the world on an exchange where I didn't have family. And at the time, it was pretty much Asia or bust. And I remember it was the year that Hong Kong was going back to China. I didn't know much about Korea, so Japan looked pretty good. So it was a bit random, but we chose Japan and I didn't look back since then.
So your first leadership job was with Lenovo in Japan?
Oh, interesting. Yeah, if you put it like that, if I look at my previous jobs, it was always as an individual contributor. And my first time as a manager in Japan would be, yes, with this Lenovo Japan job. That's right.
You took over from Rod Lappin.
Actually, there was another. So Rod is a good friend. Rod was a good friend. He unfortunately passed away a few years ago. But I knew Rod very well when I was with AMD, and there was another gentleman in between us. So I'm kind of following that. It was a Rod and a Japanese gentleman than myself.
Oh.
Yeah.
What was challenging about leading in Japan?
Sure. Well, let me give you a little background. I think not a lot of people know sort of Lenovo's position in Japan, and it's fascinating. If you look at the PC industry anywhere in the world, there's 3 competitors, and they're viciously fighting for those top 3 spots, and it's Dell, HP, and Lenovo. What sets Japan apart, and what's quite interesting, and frankly, one of the reasons I decided to take the job was that Lenovo has made quite an investment here in Japan in a number of joint ventures with some of the big Japanese companies. So, for example, to be very specific, I wasn't actually the president of Lenovo Japan only. I was the president of Lenovo Japan, and I was the CEO of NEC Personal Computers, which is a joint venture between Lenovo and NEC Corporation. So it's actually 2 companies, a single parent group, but where one of them, Lenovo Japan, is a typical kind of country manager type role. The NEC PC role, NEC Personal Computer role, was almost a true CEO role in the sense that we had 2 factories, almost 2,500 employees, and full P&L across all the different segments, from HR to accounting to finance to marketing to back-end supply, everything. So unlike typical gaishikei or foreign entity type companies, this was a real opportunity, as you said, to lead, but really lead an entire organization. One more thing about Lenovo in Japan, they've also, in the last couple of years, they did another joint venture with Fujitsu. So as I said, in most countries, you have 3 PC manufacturers battling it out. In Japan, when you add up the Lenovo brand, which is the #1 foreign brand in Japan outside of Apple. If you add up the NEC brand, which is the #1 domestic brand in Japan, and then Fujitsu, which is the #2 domestic brand, Lenovo Group in Japan has a pretty significant share advantage, and we're the only country in the world where one PC maker dominates the rest of the competition. So I know a bit of a sidetrack, but super interesting from that perspective. It really is a unique market for Lenovo. And I think that's what really attracted me to coming here. Now, to answer your question in terms of leadership, it was a bit of a challenge. And the reason I went on that sort of diatribe was that it isn't just running Lenovo Japan, which I think is challenging, but you'd have a mix of foreigners, you'd have a mix of, Lenovo is actually quite a very progressive modern company.
Is it a matrix?
You got it right. So when you look at Lenovo Japan, that's exactly right. You have, I had a significant number of people that were direct line to me, but then a lot of people that weren't, that were dotted line to me. And I'll come to, I think it's an important distinction.
That's a tricky leadership situation too. I'd like to hear about that as well.
Exactly right. And that's not, I don't think that's pertinent to just Japan. I think that's really, frankly, most multinational corporations are now in that kind of very verticalized structure, right? But I think the interesting part is, and what the challenging part of leadership in Japan, as you put it, was that the Lenovo portion was, as we discussed, but the NEC-PC portion was very domestic, meaning that, we have, 1,000, 1,200 people, to be honest, typically higher age range, primarily male. So, heavy male population, heavy older population, and in many cases, not a lot of English speakers. Now, when I came in, the joint venture had been going on for about 6 or 7 years. So I think they were fairly flexible, and probably more flexible than in most Japanese domestic companies. But ostensibly, I really was leading both a foreign national company and a domestic company at the same time. And to me, that was the big challenge, because the way to lead both those companies is actually quite different. And the skill set required to lead a modern multinational company versus more of a traditional domestic company are quite different. And that was a challenge.
Let's talk about that. So tell me what's the difference.
Well, so I think if you look at, it's going to sound a little bit stereotypical, but frankly, my experiences have proven it true. If I look at you can walk into my office and respectfully, you can look at people and kind of by their demeanor, you can say, okay, Lenovo person, okay, NEC person. Actually, you can say ex-IBM person, because we had the IBM acquisition as well. And you can kind of still tell sort of by the demeanor. And I think the big challenge is I think we're the Lenovo employees. First of all, you have more diversity just in terms of hiring and age, et cetera. But not only that, I think that in terms of risk-taking and sort of the energy around the job, I found that it seems to be a little bit more upfront with the Lenovo employees. And surprisingly, with the NEC employees, I would say they're a little more, look a little more conservative. They take a little more time in some of the decisions, less excitement up front. But when you dig in, a huge passion for the company, huge loyalty around making sure that the brand is protected and that all of the accomplishments that have been, all the accomplishments that we've done over the last 40 years here in Japan continue. So it's super interesting. You can see it sort of on the demeanor, but if you dig in, I think there's two sets of passionate people that show it in a different way.
What was your time split between the two companies?
So it's kind of, at this point now, it's pretty much amalgamated, meaning that I've structured the team so that the NEC and Lenovo brands are run out of a single operation. We don't really separate our time between NEC and Lenovo, but we're kind of paying attention to both brands.
Is the power structure balanced out between the two companies?
It's a good point. As I said, for the most part, the day-to-day operations have now been combined, so we end up doing the same thing for both. But if I split it out by what's sort of being attributed to the NEC business versus the Lenovo business, NEC takes up a bigger share. And it takes up a bigger share because, again, there's a bigger part of the business here. There's more vendors, there's more suppliers, there's a union, there's a giant corporation that's a big part of the joint venture that we have to maintain relationships with. And then, of course, there's the huge network of NEC customers, clients, and partners all over the country. So I think, and frankly, we're not just picking from a roadmap PCs that we think could sell in Japan. In many cases, we're making PCs from scratch. We're doing research in the market to find out what Japanese customers want, what they want that's different from what Lenovo, HP, and Dell can offer. And we're working with some of the largest carriers in Japan to make unique and specific products. So ultimately, I think a lot of my time gets sucked up by the NEC side because, frankly, there's more to do and more opportunity. I think one thing that Lenovo has done well, and I think it's a blueprint for being successful in joint ventures here in Japan, is that they've really left the autonomy to the Japan team. So to be very frank, I had, I wouldn't say complete, but a lot of autonomy in what I was able to do with NEC organization, NEC PC organization, and not a lot of input from NEC nor Lenovo. I would say there's a quarterly check-in with the board meetings, and of course, both sides want to make sure that money's coming in. But provided that the business is going well, and even when we're faced with some challenges, I would say that it's quite autonomous. And we have a lot of that power rests with me and the team here in Japan.
You merged them, I suppose.
Yeah, Rod had started the process, but we finalized some of it when I joined. But it's funny. I think at my layer, it's merged. But then, of course, as we start to go down, then you've got the NEC consumer team and the Lenovo consumer team and the Lenovo commercial team, NEC commercial team, and then our product teams are split. So ultimately, because they're two different brands, we have to have some sort of separation. Otherwise, there's no need to have two different brands. You need to have, they need to have their own identity. They need to have their own product strategy. But I think at the top, if we look at the back end, where we can benefit from, shared resources, shared supply, demand planning, et cetera, that's all together. And then at the leadership level, we've combined it. But in that middle layer, when it's not back end and not the kind of leadership role, I think we do have very separate teams that are running the businesses.
Were you walking on eggshells with your division heads?
I think that's where the benefit of bringing in someone like myself, right? And just to be very open, I think when a company hires a foreign executive in Japan, and I'm going to speak very stereotypically, you can kind of go two ways, right? You can hire, a local, Japanese person that has great English and understands the Japan business inside out, and then it's up to how much experience that leader has had with working with global corporations and being that bridge in between both. On the other hand, you can hire a foreign executive that's probably been in Japan a very long time. Actually, there's probably three types. Been in Japan a very long time and is very Japanese in how they operate. So the foreign company is expecting someone that can sort of help sort of the Japan team understand what's going on in the world, but often they find that's not the case, and the executive is probably more Japan than a Japanese candidate. And the third one is I would say a new executive that's imported over from a foreign country, doesn't know anything about Japan, and then runs it like they would run a company in the US or in Europe or wherever they're coming from. I think the benefit of having me and the way I've operated is that I've worked in Japan as an individual contributor. That was where I started. I then worked at a worldwide level and a regional level and been back and forth. So I've seen kind of that, what's it like at the worldwide level, what's it like at the regional level, and what's it like at a geo level. And I think what I was able to do is, while my GMs for the businesses have a lot of autonomy, and that's the way my leadership style is to provide that empowerment to go make the decisions that they want to do, I did keep a pretty tight view and control on the business and made sure that if it was running smoothly and they didn't need any help, that's fine. But I was pretty hands-on with the business, and there was not a lot of concern about walking on eggshells. I think it was pretty collaborative in terms of making sure that the business was going well, and when it wasn't, we'd work together to figure it out. So a little bit different, I think, than sort of what you've experienced, but I have seen what you've described.
How do you get people engaged?
That's a good point. It's a bit tricky because we've had sort of COVID and the Corona impact over the last couple of years. But I think, one thing that we encouraged is, you kind of have these mantras when you go in as a leader, right? And I used to think they were corny and I didn't see the value in them. Your leader would come in, they'd give you 3 or 5 slogans that you'd have to remember. But I'll tell you, I started with 3 slogans that I just believed in, frankly, and I thought it'd be valuable for the team to kind of understand my insight. And it was pretty incredible how the team rallied around that, and I think how it made a culture. So that's true.
Trade secret?
No, not at all. Their first one was win together, lose together. And that really struck a chord with the Japanese team, because win together is an easy one, right? Everyone understands that. And the first question I got after I kind of announced it, they're like, well, why lose together? Why focus on the negative? And my message was, listen, it's easy to win together. When we get something good happen, we all cheer, we all get excited. But the real trick is, when you lose together, do you point fingers and blame, or do you rally together and get back up and try again? And my point was, and it goes into my second motto, that if something bad happens, we all take responsibility and we all figure out how to fix it, we learn from it, and we move on. So win together, let's do that. But lose together, it's important that we also lose together. And that goes into the next motto, which was think big. And this was one I think I tailored a little bit for Japan. I like thinking creatively. I like thinking out of the box. People that have worked for me know, I always say, more speeding tickets, less parking tickets, meaning it's about that empowerment, meaning take some risks. And I'd rather get people in trouble for making mistakes than not doing anything at all. But I think in Japan, especially with the NEC team, I really wanted to encourage them to, number one, feel empowered to do what they think is the right thing for the business. And number two, take risks. That's why we're here. And if you think it's the right risk, you're empowered to go make that decision. And guess what? If it doesn't work out, hey, we lose together, we learn from it. As long as we learn and we move on, that's fine. So I think those went hand in hand. But I talked about what went well. It really created a culture. And if you ask me, what's the thing I'm really most proud of? I think I really helped change the culture at Lenovo and NEC PC in a way that the team really came together around that and really started taking risks. And the last one, we say, very typical, right? But we said one Japan, one team. And that goes right at the heart of that message, of that verticalization problem that we see with multinational organizations. The truth is, what's good for business, at the end of the day, the business happens in Japan. It happens in the country. It happens with the customer. Worldwide can plan all they want. The geos can consolidate all that, or the regions can consolidate all that they want. But at the end of the day, those sales happen in country. And the truth is, what's good for the Japan business isn't necessarily always what worldwide or what region wants, or isn't always necessarily aligned with their message. So I have a very strict pact with my organization, my team, and I don't care if they reported to me directly or not. Anyone that came into the organization, anyone that I interviewed, or anyone that joined the team, whether it was my direct org or not, I said, listen, we operate as one team here, and we're going to do what's best for the business here in Japan, because frankly, that will better serve the company as a whole if the business is running smoothly in Japan. And that doesn't always align with what your boss, your direct boss, might be telling you. Are you okay with that? In most cases, they were. And what I found was really being explicit about that, and frankly, being explicit about that with corporate as well, I think won me a lot of trust, and I think the team really rallied around that, so that by the end of it, even though we have hundreds of people reporting into hundreds of different people at worldwide, I could say that almost everyone on the team was always operating with a Japan First mentality.
If you want to be successful as a leader, do the Leadership Training for Managers course. All companies need people who can both manage and lead. Leading people screams out for real skills in communication, dealing with all different types of people, being excellent at innovation, planning, delegation, handling mistakes, doing performance reviews really well, and inspiring and motivating the team. Do the Leadership Training for Managers course now in either Japanese or English. Are you doing business with Japan? Do you really know how things work? Japan Business Mastery provides the answers. Do you have the right networks and know how to create them? Do you know how to get on the same wavelength with Japanese buyers? Do you know what being trustworthy looks like from the Japanese perspective? Japan Business Mastery is based on more than 30 years' experience in Japan and will become your go-to guide. Want to succeed in Japan? Buy Japan Business Mastery now. That's interesting. How about in the case of two separate teams, one more globally oriented than the other, one Japan team, win together, lose together. How did you go about getting innovation from the team?
Yeah, I think that's always the challenge, right? So a couple things. I think that foundation of having the think big mantra with the win together, lose together, the message was clear, right? Guys, go think big, and if you mess up, that's fine. But actually going and doing is a different thing. So we actually were very, very proactive in some of the activities that we planned. So we would have a monthly or quarterly award, a Think Big award, where we would go and we would recognize people that had innovative ideas. And it wasn't just new products. It was, hey, we changed the process, or we went, hey, guess what? There's this huge supply issue problem in the world around semiconductors. So we went and we worked with this company and we chartered a plane full of stuff to make sure that our customer got our PC, stuff like that. So we would recognize that with awards. We kicked off a number of innovation contests or entrepreneurial type, what do you call it? When you have like the judging panel where you bring in your ideas and we vote on ideas, like Shark Tank. So we had that kind of thing where we encouraged companies to come up with their own ideas. And then little things, right? Every Friday we call it 4:30 Friday, and a little bit kind of copying Google style, but we said, okay, 4:30 Friday, your time. You can go home, you can go to sleep, you can go out with your friends, you can go for a drink, or you can go learn and improve yourself. And we would organize activities and events around that. We would bring in guest speakers. We would do these things to kind of inspire the teams to go do something. And what I found was that with all of these mix of activities, I had team members coming to me saying, hey, David, we want to go try something new. We want to go do this, but it's not part of my job. I'm like, I don't care. If it's good for the company, let's go do it. And I'll give you an example. We kicked off a number of things that have never been done before in the PC industry. We did the world's first PC leasing service, gaming PC leasing service, Suguge, which is Sugu Gaming, right? And you for $50 a month or whatever, 6,500 yen a month, you can get a full gaming PC with headphones, keyboard, the full set. You have a whole bunch of free games from Microsoft that you can play, and you get the latest and greatest technology every time you re-up the system. So things like that was born out of these sort of push for the team to really feel like they could go open and try something new, that we would have their back. I think that's really the genesis of it. It kind of goes off, I don't want to go too much on a tangent, but what we learned from telework and what we learned from this pandemic, it really made Japanese companies and companies operating in Japan think about, are you paying an employee for the hours that they spend in the office, or are you paying them for the output that they produce? And that's a question, we have a lot of challenges in Japan where companies weren't benefiting from telework or weren't benefiting from flexibility. And the employees were saying, we want to do this, and the management was saying, we don't want to. And I think what we found is, I'm a big believer, and I don't care, if one employee can do a job in 2 hours that takes another employee 8 hours, I don't think that's unfair. I think that's great for the employee that can do it in 2 hours. And if they want to go do something else for those 6 hours, I'm fine with that. And what we found is if an employee is doing something in 2 hours that takes another employee 8 hours, the chances are in those remaining 6 hours, they aren't going home and watching Netflix. Chances are they're doing something new. And I think to give those employees the opportunity to go do something productive and useful for that time that could ultimately benefit the company, I thought we saw huge opportunities and huge ideas come out of that.
One of the flip sides of innovation, there's a lot of risk taking in that, and
Sure.
often things fail.
Yep.
And often mistakes happen. And
Yep.
we know that this is a zero defect, no mistake culture here.
Yeah, you got it.
So how did you deal with mistakes? And I don't just mean in the innovation side, I mean mistakes in general.
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's tough to answer because at the end of the day, my policy is and was, it's okay to make mistakes. And if you make mistakes, as long as the rationale was sound and there was a reason for what we were doing, and at the time, you felt like it was the better thing for the business. And most importantly, we have a concept at Lenovo, and I actually really like it. I learned it at Lenovo. It's called Fupam, and it's a Chinese word from, I think it's either from Chinese chess or Go, Chinese chess, I think. But the concept is, it's like Kaizen. It's like a continuous process of reflection. So after any quarter, any year, any kind of major sales activity, whatever, any product release, we would go back and we would reflect what went right, what didn't go well, what can we learn from this? And my only message to the team was, we can fail, and if we fail, that's fine, as long as we do Fupam. And if you ask any employee in Lenovo, whether they're NEC, Lenovo, whatever, IBM, Motorola, they'll all know what Fupan is. And Fupan is that going back and looking back at something that not only that went wrong, even that stuff that went well, and doing that reflection and taking that reflection and saying, okay, well, how can we improve it next time? Then I think there was no issues around making mistakes. And I think the team, that was something I continued to drive, and I think they really got that by the end of it. And that's where I think we started to see a lot of the innovation come out, is when they felt empowered and not afraid to go take some of those risks.
Just on that, how was it having a Chinese owner running this company here? Well, I know you're running it, but they own it in Japan for the Japanese team.
So, I think that's always for the team, it's not a problem at all. And I'll tell you why it's not a problem. I think, and even for the customers, right? If you look at Lenovo, if you look at Japan, NEC is the number one PC in Japan. It has been for 40 years, since it came out. 40 years ago, the PC 8801. The ThinkPad, the world's most popular, best-selling commercial PC, was invented here in Japan, made in Japan. So there's a lot of positive association with our company here. ThinkPad it's not a Chinese, it's ThinkPad. It's made in Japan. It's made in Yamato, right? Now it's moved to Yokohama, made right down the street. And then NEC, of course, we've kept everything about NEC the same. We do the design here. Actually, it's not even that. If you look at NEC, even our Lenovo business, it's designed in Japan with the R&D center and the ThinkPad R&D center. It's manufactured, it's produced, it's shipped, it's supported, after-service support. Everything is done in Japan. So when people look at me, they're like, well, what's it like working for Japan? What are you talking about? This is, it's more Japanese. It's more of a Japanese PC company than some of the Japanese PC companies that are still remaining today. That's number one. So I don't think the association was there. But what I can tell you is two things. Lenovo is an extremely global company. So I was a bit worried about that when I joined. But frankly, very, very global. Most of the leadership is not based in China. Now, So probably one of the most global companies I've ever worked for. Now, that being said, at the end of the day, it is a Chinese company owned with a Chinese owner. The last piece that I was going to touch on is I think what they've done in terms of how they've structured their joint ventures is brilliant. If you look at an American company like Google or Microsoft, if they acquired a company, they would come in and that would be rebranded, redone in the way that they want to do it, within a year. What Lenovo has done very successfully, not just in Japan, but with the NEC joint venture, with the Fujitsu joint venture, with Medion in Germany, is they've provided the global scale of the world's #1 PC manufacturer to get great pricing from our vendors, to get great supply chains, to get all the great things that come with scale. And they have not touched what made that company successful in its country of origin. So rather than taking Lenovo products and slapping on an NEC logo, no, we still, as I said, we design products from scratch, we manufacture them in Japan, we have a whole portfolio of Japan original products. And the rationale is Japanese customers like Japanese products. They have a great association with the Japanese NEC name. We spend a ton of money on stuff. We spend way more money than any global PC manufacturer would on support and aftercare, because that's what customers expect from the NEC brand. So I think we've got the benefit of the scale and all the good things that come from a global acquisition. At the same time, Lenovo has been extremely smart in not shaking up what works and really protecting what is important for that brand in the company. So I think it's been a really smart move, frankly.
Okay. And what about trust? How did you go about building trust
with the teams?
Yeah.
That's the key one, right? And that's one I wish I could articulate how I do it. Is it my personality? Is it, I don't know. Is it my familiarity with Japan? I'm not sure.
You're a very, very fast speaker.
That's
David.
true.
So I'm just wondering, how is the comprehension level going on from the Japanese side listening to you?
Yeah.
It's like, okay, we just slow that baby down a bit.
That's fair. We get that a lot.
I don't mind. I'm having no trouble. But if I'm a Japanese person in the company and I don't speak English as fluently, perhaps, as some others, I might be missing big chunks of what David's talking about.
Sure. So I hate to say this, but I will. So number one is I think my familiarity in Japan has helped. I would say that 85% of the meetings are conducted entirely in Japanese.
Okay. Right.
And it may be unfortunate for some of my colleagues in the industry that don't speak Japanese, but if you ask me why I think I've been able to integrate myself so much, it's because familiarity with the language naturally creates a quicker familiarity with the employees. So I think that's been of a great benefit for me. But I think, like I said, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what country you're in. If you empower your employees, you don't micromanage, you set them up to succeed, and you have their back when they fail, I think you ingratiate trust fairly quickly. And I don't think that's a Japanese or Western philosophy. I think that just works. So I think that combination of understanding Japan, understanding where they're coming from, the Japanese language, and then the way my management style in terms of empowerment and support rather than micromanagement and control, I think really helped create that trust fairly quickly. And I'll tell you, I think, I grew up, I learned sales in a Japanese, I look at all your books here, and I've sort of read your stuff over the years. And I think you really understand sort of the Japanese sales method and methodology and mentality. And frankly, I was taught in a Japanese environment. I've been pushed, hit, slapped, yelled at, embarrassed in front of my customers. And we would say in the U.S., that's crazy. It sounds like it's from the 60s, and it felt like that. But I think that the training I got in Japan in terms of that sales training was phenomenal.
And this was sales training at AMD?
I shouldn't say that, but yes.
Basically. So the sort of tough love of AMD
tough love.
made you what you are today.
Tough love of a Japanese company. It was a really Japanase environment at the time. And I argue that it actually made me a great salesperson. Very tenacious, ability to take a lot. Work way too long and hard hours, but I thought it was a really good background, a really good training. And I think having gone through that, I can sort of understand where the team's coming from. At the same time, we're in, it's 2022. That kind of old style Japanese sales mentality doesn't cut it. Just frankly speaking, the old school sales style, which still exists a lot in Japan, right? But I think we're seeing that change now. And I think my first message to the team when I came in, I saw a lot of that. I don't want to say power harassment, but I want to say I saw a lot of top-down sort of mentality.
Directive leading.
And I said, there's two ways to do this. You can beat the number out of someone, but what you'll get is it won't be sustainable, and you won't get the best result. So you can do two things. You can beat the number out of someone and see how long that lasts, or you can work from the bottom up and you can inspire a better number out of them. And I think my message was, we don't want to beat a number out of someone. We want to inspire a number. We want to make people feel like they can go do their best and they're inspired to go get that number. And I think that's something.
You talked about yourself, how
Yeah.
you inspire the team.
Yeah.
And one of the issues is what happens with the next level down, and what about the division heads and then the section bosses, etc.
Yeah.
How are they inspiring people rather than beating the number out of them? How are they inspiring the number out of them?
I would say that's a continued challenge, right? Number one, as a leader, when you get to a certain level, a leadership level, you can lead by example, and you can lead by the processes and plans that you have in place. So I would say that, you're right. My direct level, my direct staff, I think you lead by example. We make sure that my direct staff is leading by whatever kind of cultural mentality or cultural fit that I implement. But the further you go down, you've got less visibility. And is that message really permeating to the bottom or not? To be honest, I would say it's mixed. I would say I saw some teams that really embraced what the leadership was doing and what we were talking about and the culture that we wanted to drive. And then I saw some teams that were still operating, in a way that probably I wasn't as comfortable with. Again, I wish I had a solution for that. I don't. I think recognizing that it's a continuing process, and that to assume that because you're doing it in your direct leadership and in your leadership vicinity, everyone's doing it, that the entire organization is doing it, especially with a large organization, is a mistake. So I think vigilance to make sure that that's happening, continuing to lead by example, and frankly, it goes back to those mottos. I used to be not a fan of those mottos, but when you have a large organization, it's important to be constant and consistent with your messaging. And then hopefully one of the employees sees that and says, I'll tell you, we had employees join the company and they say, David, I joined because you're promoting telework, or because you wanted women back in the workforce, or because you play esports. They had their reasons for joining. And a lot of them were around, the environment and the culture that we projected to the market. And if you project that message and then you're not sort of living that message, you hear about it and you see the attrition rate start to increase. So that's one way of also monitoring whether that message is permeating through or not.
And also in terms of, you've got an NEC culture, you've got a Lenovo culture, and then you're creating a sort of a combined
hybrid
culture, right? What did you find worked well in terms of creating that culture?
Like I said, it was, I don't think it's one thing. I think it was a fairly consistent push around messaging and taking it's interesting. We took some good parts, we took some very traditional Japanese things and then some sort of modern business approaches. I came in, there was a monthly Monday meeting. And the meeting, everyone stood up and we talked for an hour, and I'm like, is anyone listening? Is this valuable to anyone? Now, having those meetings and having those opportunities to communicate with the employees and communicate together and ensuring that all the employees understood what's the status of the business, what's going on, is important. But does it have to be an hour-long, every Monday meeting that's so formulaic, it's almost being done out of habit rather than being meaningful? So we took that and we changed that, and we turned it to a monthly meeting, fully online, where everyone joined with more video elements. I think things like that, taking things that Japanese employees are more comfortable with, the regular meetings, the regular communications, and then sort of fine-tuning them to make them a little more meaningful, less meetings. When we had meetings, making sure that it was the people that needed to be there were there. The people that didn't need to be there would be communicated the important information from their employees so they could save some time. We did a lot of little things, right? We spent a lot of time around cultural and social events. So we would, we revived all of our clubs. So we had some clubs that were a bit stagnant, and we had English club, and we had computer club, we had business club, we had tennis, we put all these clubs in place, completely funded by the company. Again, you could take your Friday 4:30 time and go do club activities and all that. And we tried to create these opportunities for the teams to get together. And what we found, and esports and gaming and stuff more related to our industry. And what we found was regularly we'd have people from NEC, people from the factory, people from headquarters UDX, people from Lenovo, people from the server team, all coming together. And we put a lot of effort into those kind of activities and events.
And if you're going to give some advice to someone who is coming here in that third case that you gave, they don't know Japan, they've been sent from headquarters to do something or other here, would be some advice you'd give a person doing that?
Right, and I don't want to be condescending, but I think most importantly, self-evident, is listen. And what I mean by listen is there's no question that you're being sent to Japan because you've had some great accomplishments, and the company trusts you to continue doing what's worked. But I think when you're moving to a new country or a new culture or new styles, especially somewhere like Japan, it's important to listen and really understand what's working for the team here. And what you can learn from them as well. And it sounds simple, right? But I think it's pretty clear. It's famous, right? In Japan, you'll get a lot of head nodding. You get a lot of people saying, yes, we listen, we got it. And then what they're saying that they're doing and what they're saying that's happening might not necessarily reflect the actual state of the business. And I think what you're seeing there, it's not disrespect, it's not sneaky. I think the team is genuinely wanting and trying to understand what this new person is asking and to achieve it. But at the same time, there's a reality of business in Japan that to be successful, they know what they have to do as well. And the real way to succeed is to not try and rewrite how the Japan ecosystem works, because you might be able to change how your company works. I doubt it, but you might. But even if you do, you can't rewrite how your partners and your customers and the consumer buying behavior or the commercial buying behavior works. So I think to be able to find that hybrid is what can you bring to the organization that can help optimize what they're doing. At the same time, what can you learn from how Japan operates, and how do you best combine the two to be successful? I think that's the only way to really do it, frankly.
Any other advice? Should they learn Japanese?
Yeah, I'll be honest. Let me put it a different way. No offense to the sales guys out there that say, Dave, I can sell anything. I don't care if it's technology, whatever, I can sell anything. Okay, that's great. But if you're working in a computer company, guess what? I want you to understand the technology that you're selling, because I think it's really important, the authenticity of understanding what you're selling. It shouldn't just be because you can sell ice to an Eskimo. No, we don't want that. If you're going to sell PCs, I want you to really understand how a PC works better than whoever you're selling it to. And I would probably apply that to the language as well. You don't have to be a master at it, but you'd be amazed at the amount of respect you'll earn and benefit you'll have by making the effort to at least learn it. So I would say a strong yes on that.
Any other advice you can think of for newbies?
Yeah, I think Japan, like I said, is again, I feel like I'm bringing out a whole bunch of stereotypes and tropes, but frankly, this is what I've learned is that a great example is partner networks in Japan, partnerships. Any deal that you do, any corporate business that you do, there's not one or two companies involved. There's 15 companies involved, and many of the times you don't even know that they're involved until after the case. Many times I would look at the PO and I'd say, okay, there's 3 companies involved. And then I forgot there's a company that's, making the boxes, and there's a company that's opening the door for the boxes to come in. There's all these little companies coming in, and that's just how Japan business is done.
Oh, the Stauke,
You got it.
The suppliers.
You got it. But what's interesting is there are other countries in the world where there's a very channel-friendly, partner-friendly ecosystem. Australia is a great example. Australia has a very similar function in that there's a lot of companies involved, and there's a lot of the partner ecosystem, and the channel ecosystem is very strong. I think one of the big differences is in those countries, like even Australia, at the end of the day, money talks, meaning that if the dollars and cents make sense, ultimately they'll choose the better deal over the partner. In Japan, as we know, that isn't the case. There are many, many times where it might be a worse deal. It might be less money, less profit, but there will be decisions made that are based not on the deal in front of you, but on the history of the relationship or the potential future opportunity in having a good relationship with a company. And I think that's probably the hardest thing that I have to explain to headquarters. They're like, well, this doesn't make sense. I'm like, correct. From your perspective, if we're looking just at the P&L, if we're looking just at the numbers, it doesn't make sense.
And we're looking at the short term.
Short term. But if you look at the Japan, and if you look at the value is placed on previous relationships and future relationships, then there's value there that you have to account for. And that's probably the hardest thing, the most counterintuitive thing, I think, to explain to countries that don't have that similar.
Yeah. Show me the money, but it's actually, no, show me the trust.
It's exactly right. It's really well put. It sounds corny, but, it's true. So...
Yeah. And if there's something I haven't asked you about leadership in Japan, David, that we haven't covered.
Sure.
Anything you can think of?
No, I think, like I said, I think for me, one of the most interesting experiences about running, I think Lenovo NEC PC was a phenomenal experience. And I was so excited to be here in a time in Japan where the market was booming. We had Giga School. We had, COVID was a really boom for telework and really drove our industry. And then we had just a couple things in our industry that happened. So it was an incredibly tumultuous but exciting 4 years. But I think, to me, more than anything, I found what was really interesting was that mix between the domestic company and the foreign company. So my advice is, if you ever find yourself coming in and you're not just working for a foreign company, but you're either working for a domestic company, domestic Japanese company, or you're working with a lot of domestic partners, I think it's really important to recognize that the way you lead a domestic company is going to be different than the way you work with a foreign capitalized company. And it could be in your product strategy. I'll give you a great example. I could take Lenovo PCs and you cut the price, guess what? You sell more. You take NEC PCs, guess what? You cut the price and you sell less because there's a perceived value there. And I think that kind of transfers to the employees and the way that you lead the companies as well. The expectations and what they're looking for in a leader is different. So you have to really be able to adapt your style and recognize, okay, is this my message for the NEC side, the domestic side? Is this my message for the foreign side? Or is this some fancy hybrid message for both? And sort of optimize and tune your message for that. Challenging, but rewarding if you can get it right.
What's your definition of leadership?
My definition of leadership, I wish I had a good fancy one I could tell you, but at the end of the day, not definition, my hope and my goal is that if you can empower your employees, empower your teams to be successful, in my mind, that's leadership. And empowerment means everyone's rowing the boat in the same direction. Everyone wants the best for the company. So top-down, power harassment, micromanaging, that's not leadership. Inspiring people to go row in the same direction and empowering them to feel like they can make decisions that will help them get there will do far more for growth and development, loyalty and trust than anything else. So I think that's how I would look at leadership.
Fabulous. Sounds like a great place to conclude the interview. Thank you very much.
Great.
So please join us again for our next episode of Japan's top business interviews.